Okay, that's too loud. This week I got to have the gift of celebrating my 56th birthday. And I tell you that to say this. I realized when I always get the readings on Sunday night and start to reflect, so I read them, and I realized that what's 3 into 56? Well, whatever that number is, that's the number of times that in the history of the church as a child to now, I have heard these readings. And in every moment or every third year when this comes up, who do you say that I am? And I realized in this moment in time that the Aidan, and you have to answer this for yourself, the Aidan that's here is a very different person from the first time I would have heard this reading. These children have to answer this question that Jesus is asking in a very pointed way. And there is no way around it. There's the messianic secret in Mark. You're saying to yourself, well, the disciples didn't get it, and they walked with Jesus. How are you and I able to get and answer this if they didn't get it? Clearly, Jesus said to them first, well, you know, guys, what has really been said about me? And some are thinking John the Baptist, some Elijah, some are thinking a prophet. And yes, he is all of those things. But the question becomes, who do you say that I am? And I realize in my own personal journey of life that there is a centeredness that I have found through contemplative prayer that only happened this year. Actually, Patrick, who's an ex-Jesuit, who's sitting right there and taught a class, do you ever come to a moment where you've been waiting on something in your life and the moment arrives and then you realize this is it? This is something that I have needed, even in the storms and the crosses that we're all appreciate, the ones we don't want, the things that are always happening in our lives, and every single person here has a cross. And we know that the suffering servant, it's about what is going to happen in the future. Isaiah tells us what's going to happen to Christ. But even Peter is looking for this big dude as a king to ride into Jerusalem and kick out the Romans. And that is not the Christ that we're called to. But yet, in all, Jesus Christ continues to walk with them. They don't get it, but he still walks with them. And the secret, you and I already have the secret. We have all of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We have the beloved community as it unfolded in all of the letters. And we have 2,000 years worth of history to invite us in. But even with all of that, you and I are invited to look into our hearts and sit with Jesus. And I've realized we don't need a lot of words. What we're invited to do is sit lovingly and in quiet and sit before your God and let God, who does not have a gender, look lovingly on you. And to take that time, and even in the messiness that life can be, and every one of us can testify to some cross that we're carrying, and maybe many crosses, the invitation remains the same. Who do you say that I am? And that's the invitation that I have to answer, and I cannot answer that for you. Each one of us have to be able to do that. And in the light of the gospel, in the light of the second reading, wouldn't you have loved it if it was all women that were involved at the Reformation? Ladies, a bunch of guys who are getting together and using a text like this and saying, The reformers are like, oh, it's all about faith. It is all about faith. And then the Catholic Church at the Council of Trent said, well, it's more about works, because they said it was about faith. Ladies, I think what you would have done was said, both and, brothers. Amen. Both and. Yes. It is a gift to have faith, but if you do not have works, if you are not, like we celebrated last night with the Bishop of Oakland, actually yesterday I got to celebrate 2 masses with him yesterday. One in the morning with our On Fire youth over at Six Flags. But you know, when I'm up on the altar and I hear the bishop saying the quiet prayers, and somebody, one of my priest friends, Father Stefan Kepler, says, Aidan, you've got daddy issues with the bishop. But he and I just don't see it the way, you know, the way, but I have got to a place where it's okay. But when he's up there praying all the quiet prayers, and I'm standing up there at a mass with 1,000 young people, and he's saying his prayers in Latin, I'm trying to be holy, but I'm going, oh, Jesus, please. You never spoke Latin. And why is he doing this? And then I'm thinking, who cares why he's doing it, Aidan? Because it's not about you. You just need to do and be centered in what you believe is the presence of God in the church. I choose to stay inside the church in order to make a difference rather than stand outside the church and lob big stones into the middle of it. We have to be part of the solution. And I know that when you're answering the question, the very fact that every single one of you woke up this morning and decided to come to church tells the world who you are. You are telling Christ who you are, even in the midst when it's really embarrassing to be a Catholic today. Amen? And it's even embarrassing to talk about it. And we know that this stuff is going to come up over and over and over again. And I'm hoping that this week our bishop, daddy issues again, the bishop will do what San Jose did and give out all of the names with credible reports of hurting children. Our diocese needs to do that. I know the politics of all of this is always about this. And in fact, when in the state of California, they tried to pass a bill to get rid of the statute of limitations. Our church, and I know this for a fact, worked real hard to squash that bill. Because at the end of the day, we as the diocese have given out $60 million back in the early part of this millennia or century. And the thought of that happening again and the statute of limitations, you can see very clearly what could happen. But you know what Pope Francis says to us? We don't need buildings. We do not need a cathedral. We do not need this church. We have tents, and on Sunday morning we'll all come together no matter where we need to come together. Amen? Pope Francis is telling us that we need to be about being the dirty church. The church means all of us out on the streets and smell of fish, Freudian slip, smell of the sheep, in order to be able to answer that call. At the end of the day, it really doesn't matter how many times you go to Mass. It doesn't matter how many times you celebrate the sacraments. It doesn't matter how many times you do things. The answer and the invitation is always going to be about the works of the gift of faith, and then being able to live that out in your lives. Our baptismal call is not like what our Reformed brothers and sisters say, oh, I'm saved. You're not saved if you don't live out the gospel and you don't have the gift of love. If your sister or brother hurts, if people are excluded for any reason, if we don't live out the gospel of love for everybody, always and at all times and all places, Jesus Christ is not an anemic little dude that a lot of the youth see today. It's some passionless person. He was someone full of passion and so full of love for the dream that each and every one of us can be. He lived it, he walked the walk, he talked the talk, and he knew that at the end of the day, he was going to be put on that cross because he was countercultural, he went the other way, and he was about love. We need to be about love in all of our lives, our minds, our bodies, our souls, and in every part of our sexuality and everywhere. Nothing is excluded from the gift of love, and it's about the works that we do outside. So at the end of the day, every single one of us here, from the very youngest, are you listening to me? What do you mean? What does that mean? You live very dangerously, brother. Each and every one of us are invited to answer that question for ourselves. Our baptism is not an insurance policy. It is not an insurance policy. Going to Mass is not an insurance policy. It is a job description on how to live the gift of life and love, and that's the only thing that you'll take into eternity. Who do you say that I am? Amen?